Hello, welcome to Fireside Chats. I am Magla Pillai, and today we are looking at the subject of the incorporeal state and accessing Nirvana. If this is strange to you in terms of the terminology, fear not, because we have a yogi who has 40 years of spiritual study under her belt who will be taking us through it. In this series, we look at a variety of subjects surrounding spirituality. We look at what your relationship is with God, whomever you believe him or her to be. We ask you to look at your inner and outer world and ask yourself whether there is a balance between the two. We also ask you to keep an open mind, because there are aspects that we cover on this show that may be news to you. Sister Denise, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
A very warm welcome to today's show. Sister Denise, incorporeal, Latin word, Latin derivations. That's not a word that one hears commonly nowadays. Tell us what that means.
We are incarnated into the body. So carno means meat. So our human body is the flesh and bones. But the spirit who has incarnated into the body is not flesh and bones. So incorporeal refers to when the spirit is not in the body. So sometimes you can use the word discarnate. And we particularly use this word to refer both to when the soul is not incarnated into the body, and to refer to God, who doesn't have a body of his own. Although there is this idea of the incarnation of God. And so if God will incarnate and not have a body of his own, it means he will use the body of another, incarnate in that for a purpose, and then leave that body. But you see, if I would leave this body, then it would die. If a soul borrows the body of another and then leaves, that body still has its own soul to keep it alive. So it's a very subtle concept about the way in which God can communicate to a human soul in the world of matter, which is the requirement for communication.
Sister Denise, what is the aim of your spiritual practice? Is accessing Nirvana the ultimate experience for you, or is there something beyond that?
When we study about the details of spiritual knowledge, we become introduced to the idea and the reality of Nirvana, and also to be aware that the aim of many of the religions and spiritual practices is to go to Nirvana and not come back. Brahma Kumaris has a different aim. Going to Nirvana is part of the process, but it's not the end. Having gone to Nirvana, you then return back to the earth, and the work that you do spiritually in this birth is for the purpose of finishing your karma, so that you don't reincarnate in this time cycle, but that you return back to Nirvana. But then there's another time cycle that comes, a different time cycle, and you incarnate at the beginning of that time cycle. And so Nirvana also is given other names, and another name for it is Mukti. So Nirvana literally means the place where there is no sound of any voice. Vani means the voice. And there is this expression also, Akashvani, and that is often associated with the way in which God speaks, the voice from the ether. Of course, God dwells beyond the ether, because the ether is still one of the 5 elements of matter. So Nirvana also has another name, which is Paramdham or Parlok. There are a number of different words that are used in the Hindi and Sanskrit language to refer to the dimension which is outside the material universe, which is beyond what we call the mind space or the subtle regions. And so that is the world of light, that is the dwelling place of God. It is absolutely and completely silent. So sometimes it's called Shantidham, the world of silence. The word Dham refers to a location that is sacred. And so where God dwells, that's a sacred location. So God dwells in the silence, in the world that is beyond the material world, and that is also the place where souls come from and where they return back to. And consequently, it is also known as the home of souls.
When it comes to the aspects that are intangible, invisible, there is a shocking amount of confusion as regard to who God is, where God is, what God is, and then where God lives. Okay, so there's, from what you just said, Nirvana appears to be a thing, whereas God is, or a place, and God is someone. Okay, now there seems to be confusion about the place and the resident of the place. Would you take us through that?
Because these things, both God and Nirvana and what I call the subtle regions, they're inaccessible to people ordinarily. And they have been accessed by different people using different spiritual methods. People over the years have talked about their experiences, and when you experience something, you're experiencing it with your mind, and then you'll interpret it. And your interpretation and description of your experience is then described to someone. Another person may have a slightly different experience of either the same thing or a different aspect of it, and they'll come back and they'll give a slightly different description. And so then, are they two different things? Are they two people's experience of one thing? You know, there's a story, a joke that you often hear. In India, there were 5 blind men who were presented with an elephant, and they were all asked to say what it is. And then someone said, well, it's, you know, sort of like a sail, and it flaps, you know. And then another one said, oh, well, it's really round and big, like a big barrel. Then another one said, no, it's kind of long and moves around and, you know, like a snake. And then another one says, no, it's kind of like a brush, you know. And then another one says, no, it's really hard and pointy and, you know, seems quite dangerous. So they're all, you know, touching different bits of the elephant, and because they each have a little bit of it which is different from the other bits, because they're blind, their interpretation is different. So blind means you don't know, not so much that you don't see, but also that you don't know. So the speciality of God is that God doesn't know things by experiencing them. God knows things by knowing them, independently of experiencing them. This is why God is said to be omniscient. And so what type of things does God know? God knows what Nirvana is and can describe it. That's where he lives. God knows about us, how we move through time. God knows the process of evolution and devolution. God knows the laws of karma. God knows all of the things that a human being cannot figure out simply by accessing them through sense perception, aided or unaided by technology. So we human beings, even though, in science they say, well, this is objective knowledge, we know it's objective because it can be reproduced, but in fact it's subjective because you can observe whatever you observe, whether it's repeatable or not, but you observe it through your sense perceptions.
You use the word evolution and devolution right now. Could you explain that terminology to us from a spiritual perspective? Because I assume you're not talking about Charles Darwin.
Well, Charles Darwin's theory of evolution is pretty well known, but in terms of the way we look at the energy of the soul, anyone who understands physics, the laws of motion and all this, when an energy comes into motion, then that energy gets lost, gets transferred. The energy creates the motion, and then that's it, it's over. So the soul is an energy, comes into a body, starts thinking, talking, doing things, and that process causes the energy of the soul to gradually get dissipated and used. And so that implies that every time you take a new incarnation, your state of energy, your level of energy is lower than it was in your previous incarnation. So you're gradually getting lower and lower and less capable in terms of your spiritual capacity, your intellectual capacity, and so on and so on. So we look at it as, you start off complete, whole, full, and you gradually empty out as you pass through the time cycle, and when you reach the end of the cycle, then you have to go back to your beginning. And so how do you restore to yourself everything that was used over this many thousands of years? That is really what happens when a soul comes in contact with God, is that all of that energy and state of awareness and qualities and everything comes back to the soul from God. God is the only soul who is not in the machine, who doesn't become empty and full. So this is why I think one of the very important words that apply to God is that God is absolutely changeless. The word is immutable. And in some religions it is said God is immutable, but then what are the corollaries of that, the implications of that? That's not necessarily gone into, but we do go into that. God is immutable, remains the same. I am mutable. I mutate from perfect, slowly to imperfect, but then in order for me to mutate from empty to full, I have to resource myself. The process of getting empty is automatic, but the process of getting full, you have to fill from somewhere using some method. So that is what the spiritual practice and the yoga is all about.
So Denise, in terms of human beings accessing or going to Nirvana, why make the journey?
I think that there are several reasons. One is that when the soul is in Nirvana, the soul is absolutely pure and at its peak in a latent state. The soul is not at all doing any action. There's no experience of the passage of time. Nirvana is a completely timeless place because nothing at all happens there. And it is attractive to people because you're complete, you're perfect, you're full, and there isn't any trouble. There's neither any sorrow nor any happiness. It's a state of being absolutely like a zero. And so very often we will say that it is the state of being a seed. And seeds can be maintained over extremely long periods of time. and they stay like that until they get planted, watered, and sunshine and all of that to cause the seed to grow. So the soul is considered as a seed, and when it comes in a body, it manifests, you see. So why you would want to access nirvana is this desire to go back to your original state. Because your current state, you feel empty, you feel depleted, you feel that this is not the right way to be. Because the cycle is reaching its end time and there's a new cycle about to come. Between the end of one cycle and the beginning of the next cycle, all the souls have to return back to nirvana because we have to restart, we have to reset the world. And so the world itself, the physical world, has to go through a complete reorganization of all the aspects of nature. All the oceans have to be purified, the land has to be purified, the air has to be purified. And so this is a huge process in which if you happen to be sort of sitting somewhere, it might not be a good spot. So better the souls return home. Well, the playground, the earth is our stage, it's a playground, you know, and it has to be reset, rebuilt, you know, taken down and put up again. And so this is the process that happens, the absolute transformation, not just only of souls, but also in the world of matter. So when the souls come out of matter, sit in the soul world, and then when their allotted time happens in their destiny, they will come and they will play their roles. But it's a kind of one-way traffic. So once you come down onto the earth, you will reincarnate, you will perform your roles, you will engage in interaction with other people, and your history will play itself out, your character will present itself through various different costumes, through different roles, and you pass through changes. You pass through the different ages and epochs and historical periods and civilizations, until finally you reach a point where you say, I'm tired and I want to go home. And that's because you are, and it's time to go home. So when it's time to go home, you go home. So the home of the Father of Souls is also the home of the souls.
As you speak, I'm remembering the words of William Wordsworth, the world is too much with us. Those words came to mind. Sister Denise, you know, when as human beings, when we have problems, if there is this feeling of emptiness, if there is a vacuum, if there is a sense of unease, we're so accustomed to looking for our solutions down here, meaning here on earth. Okay, we look to things and we look to people for answers. Now you're talking about a solution, a spiritual solution to a worldly problem that is out of this world. Now, in the first place, how does one go about diagnosing yourself? Because what you're saying is, although the problems that human beings have appear to be physical, they're actually spiritual. Okay, and the answer is to be found within the spirit and from God. So, you see, people don't think like the way you just described. So how does one come to this awareness that this makes sense, this is the answer, and this is what will work for me?
You know, the way people think is very much to do with prevailing social attitudes and the ideas of what the world is and how it works and so on. And these days, people think in terms of quantum physics and all of that, but what's been happening, that came out in the 1970s, we can say, but now new physics is emerging, which is very unorthodox. but which is nevertheless slowly getting more and more credibility, because people are finding that no, it can't be the way quantum physics said, it has to be this other way or something like it. And what the new physicists are saying is that they can detect a barrier between the physical world and something else which is not physical, where the physical world is mirrored in the non-physical world, and the non-physical world seems to resemble rudimentary form of consciousness. And so what they're saying is that it seems to them that consciousness precedes matter, whereas the quantum physicists are saying there is only matter, there isn't anything like consciousness. So here you have a huge difference in thinking, and this has been emerging since 20-30 years, highly unorthodox, but gradually becoming more and more mainstream, and the universities are having to deal with that. And of course, you know, everybody likes the status quo, and nobody wants any disturbances to what has been considered as this is the nature of things, this is the way things are. But invariably throughout history, sooner or later something comes along, and we know what happened to Galileo, who said, well, you know, the earth revolves around the sun. That didn't go over very well at all. Of course, now everybody knows perfectly well that the earth revolves around the sun, you see. So every so often, every few hundred years or whatever, the way things are is understood very differently. And I think we are at a time when, you know, the absolute materialism of the 1920s, when it was said that, well, God is dead, there is no God, there's only matter, and so on and so forth, that kind of failed in a way, and subsisted and lasted up to a point, but you know, the whole question of morality started to come in, because what the material physical science is non-ethical. And so people were saying, well, we cannot accept that reality is non-ethical because that doesn't feel right, because we have to deal with the question of human suffering, and that's a reality. So these new approaches that are emerging indicate a kind of convergence between science and religion or spiritual matters, because you see, otherwise science was on one end of the world and spirituality or religion completely the opposite end, and they were at loggerheads with each other. And the problem of religion is it's, you know, it can't really be substantiated. It's blind faith. And science is non-ethical, so the religious people don't accept that. But what you've got now is spirituality, consciousness, and science coming closer. And so now people are really trying to figure out, okay, now what is it really? Maybe we can know this stuff. And that is of great interest to people who are practicing Raj Yoga, because we're all the time focusing on that coming together, that interface between matter and spirit, and how matter influences spirit, how spirit influences matter.
Okay. Denise, one last aspect. Tell us how in your daily practice of meditation do you access Nirvana and the divine, and what your experience has been of the incorporeal state?
You really need to give a substantial amount of time to it. So depending on what kind of a day you have, you may have a very active, busy day, and then you would be with God, but you might not go off to Nirvana and sit there for a few hours, because I think that the times when I have been there, you're focusing on your meditation pretty much exclusively over a long period of time, until you reach a point where you cross from the material state to the non-material state. I mean, you practice the incorporeal state, the seed stage, regularly, but to actually get there and be there, it has to be a very focused practice over a long period of time. And then what happens when you do that, you have experiences which then remain in your memory. And then you can access that and go there quite rapidly anytime you want. So I think especially in the early morning meditation, where things are really, really quiet, because Nirvana means you go into absolute silence, you go into absolute bodilessness, and so I wouldn't say that I would do that level of meditation every day, because there are a lot of times when I'm quite active in the day, but there are periods of time which are absolutely dedicated just to deepening the meditation. Then you can really go there.
Okay. Yes, this has been a riveting half an hour, so thank you for that. There you go, brothers and sisters, the subject of accessing Nirvana and understanding what it means to practice the incorporeal state. I hope you have been taking notes, because this is an extremely interesting subject. And Sister Denise has shared aspects about the world that is invisible and intangible that very few of us actually know, understand, comprehend. I hope that you, if you are practicing spirituality in some way, are able to use this knowledge to your advantage, and I do wish you everything of the best in your own spiritual journey. We will see you soon. Take care and goodbye.